Hi, I'm Emily. I am a screenwriter and author living in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. I write character-driven stories across genres. My favorites to write in are dramas, romances, rom-coms, and fantasy and romantasy. When I was little, I loved reading. Stories were so much fun. I would find new picture books and attach to them and read them over and over and over again. By the time I entered first grade, where we had bins of books that were labeled with colored stickers based on difficulty, I was at the red challenging reading level because I had read so much before getting to school. Come second grade, we got to write our own stories, and I thought that was so exciting. I wrote, I think, like 13 books in second grade and bound them with fabric and cardboard and glue, and it was just really creative and inspiring. I wish I could say that my love of story never died, that I was an avid reader for most of my life, but I wasn't. By the time book reports and essays started taking over school and it was about symbolism was or what the author was trying to do instead of what a book meant to me, I stopped enjoying reading as much. For a long time, I didn't read, with the exception of the Twilight Saga in high school. When I was 16, 17, that is probably the last book series that I devoured before 2 years ago getting back into fantasy and reading A Court of Thorns and Roses. Despite not reading as much in high school or college because of the impetus on correct assessment of a text instead of like what it brought up in you or what the emotional components were, I was still in love with storytelling. I just moved on to a different medium and started watching a lot more films. So in high school, I started watching a lot of Brat Pack movies like 16 Candles, Pretty in Pink, St. Elmo's Fire, Breakfast Club. And one day in geography class, I was talking to my teacher, who wasn't even supposed to be my teacher. He was substituting for most of the year for our geography teacher. I started talking to him about how I was watching all these movies, and he said, oh, if you really want to fall in love with some classics, you need to watch these. And he gave me a post-it card, like note card, that you'd use for those godforsaken book reports, and he wrote a list of films that he thought I needed to watch. And I wish I still had the note card, and I wish I knew what other movies were on there, but the one that I loved the most was Casablanca, and I watched it for the first time sophomore year of high school, and I fell in love with filmmaking. It was beautiful. The characters were so well developed. The romance was intriguing. The humor was there. The filmmaking itself, the cinematography, the lighting, the shots, all of it was just so all-encompassing. I fell in love with it, and I thought that I wanted to make things that were that timeless and beautiful and empathetic and compassionate and interesting, that they could stand the test of time, that, you know, a teenage girl in, 2007 could enjoy it decades after its intended audience received it. In college, I studied film. I went to Emerson College in Boston and studied filmmaking. I thought I wanted to be a cinematographer or a production designer, be part of what made the film beautiful, since I was so drawn to aesthetics and art and photography and design classes in high school. But I quickly found out that set life was not necessarily for me. So then I sort of thought, well, maybe I could get into directing, because that's, you've got your fingers in every department, but you don't have to be an expert per se in every single department. You have to hold the bigger vision for the group. Film theory and critical film theory, surprisingly, was more of my bread and butter. I enjoyed breaking down films, seeing how the story came together, seeing why the characters were the way they were, what color choices were made, and all of these like inner working parts. And I discovered that all started with the screenplay. I decided that I wanted to be the person that drew the roadmap, the architectural plans for the film, give the creative foundation for the story that would eventually make its way to the silver screen. So I took a lot more screenwriting classes. I fell in love with it and decided somewhere in my senior year that I either wanted to keep pursuing screenwriting or get into production design. I also just really love the concept of digging into these characters, these worlds, and creating the landscape of that to be filmed, whether that was an emotional drama where you'd, set up a house and put the pots and pans on the wall and make it look lived in and like this character, or whether it was something a lot more fantastical. So I applied to MFA programs for both production design and screenwriting. I visited AFI and SCAD, got into their production design programs, and was applying to Chapman University as a production design student. And at the last minute, I changed my application to screenwriting. I had about 4 or 5 other applications out to big film schools, and I only got accepted to 2. Chapman and BU for screenwriting. And ultimately I decided that production design was a bit of a cop-out. I was using it as a safety net because design work could be applied to other kinds of work, interior design, store design, window displays, things like that, just in case the film thing didn't work out. And realistically, I wanted the film thing to work out. I wanted my screenwriting to work out. So I went to Chapman. I studied screenwriting even more fully. I got my scripts torn to shreds by my peers in our workshops. I grew a thicker backbone and thicker skin and got better. And by the time we graduated, my friend Marguerite and I decided that we wanted to make our first feature film. So we, with a crew of 5 or 6, depending on the day, a budget of $25,000, my Nikon DSLR camera, and my thesis script that I wrote at Chapman University, went out and filmed our first film, Stuck on Someday. In hindsight, our sound equipment wasn't good enough to be able to host it on streaming sites like Amazon Prime, Netflix, things like that. So it does not live anywhere anymore, but it did get to screen at Reading Film Fest. It won Best Original Score. We had so much fun and learned a lot, and I would still love to go out and direct another feature film, even 9 years later. But after that experience, I was working for a storytelling app. I was writing and directing for a mobile gaming app and was feeling a little adrift. So come 2018, I decided I needed to be at least a little closer to the action. So my husband and I looked for a house in Kingston, New York. And we weren't married at that point, but we found a house. We're there for the indie filmmaking of it all, and then COVID hit. And so I was still doing what I could for my screenwriting, but was feeling like the world was shutting down. Hollywood was a mess. There were no productions being made. People were milking the Marvel cow. No original screenplays seemed to be making it into production anywhere. And so I heard my dad's advice again about maybe you should try to write a book. 2020 was a tough year for everyone. I understand that, but I had the added struggle of learning that my dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And so I was taking his advice a little more seriously and trying to hold this optimism that he would get better. So that summer, I took his advice and I entered this little workshop with a spiritualist who writes the notes from the universe. And he had this exercise where you come up with a brainstormed list of titles, and that's how you get going on your next project. So with the intention to write some kind of fictional book, because my own attempts had failed, I did this title exercise. And it came up with the title Cressida Altinari and the Oracle of Orion. That has since been shortened to The Oracle, but it was the idea that started me in novel writing. Every other idea beforehand, I had tried to get going. I tried to outline. I'm usually a very, very big plotter. I do pages and pages of outlines, but it just wasn't coming together with the book. So with The Oracle, I decided to try something different. I sat down with my laptop. I lit a little candle. I put crystals around my laptop. I sent up a prayer to whoever was listening and said, please help me write my first book. And I would close my eyes and followed word by word as I saw it across the ticker tape of my mind and came up with the bulk of my first ever fantasy epic. I'd never written fantasy in my life, but it was so much fun. And then I went back and tried to piece it all together and was sending chapters to my dad late into 2020. And then in January of 2021, he passed. I could have taken that as defeat of he was never going to get to see my book anyway, so what was the point in writing it now? Instead, I wanted to see it through. So I had my friends help me fix this book and spent a year and a half trying to edit it and work on it while I was still writing screenplays, and we were selling our house in New York and moving back to New Hampshire and building houses here, and there was just all this stuff going on. And eventually I had this other idea that I like to say was divinely inspired by my spirit guides, my dad being one of them, and it was to reimagine one of my favorite stories, Pride and Prejudice. So in 2024, I wrote the first draft of Henhouse. It will be released in September on my dad's birthday, September 24th, 2025. That's kind of how I got to where I am. I genre jump. I don't like to say I am a romance writer or a fantasy writer or a drama writer. I like to write character-driven stories, things that are motivated by their wants, needs, desires, failures, faults. That's what you can expect from me. I'm here to give information on my creative process, on ways that could help your creative process. I want to recommend great stories, whether they're films or books, whether it's a new TV series or a limited series or just a little novella that I fell in love with. I think that storytelling is empathetic, It is compassionate. It is a way to experience the world within the four walls of your own home. And I just love telling story. And ironically, the same things that got me out of reading when I was in high school, the dissection of symbolism and theme and character motivation, all of those things, I love to talk about them now. And that is because I love to talk about them in a way that relates to like who I am and what my experience is and what my friends' experience is, and having conversations like that, as opposed to saying this is the right way to interpret the green light at the end of the dock. I am on YouTube to connect with readers and writers, screenwriters and filmmakers, to talk about great stories and share them with you, whether you're looking to consume them or create them. I want to offer a behind the scenes look at how I get to where I get to with my writing, as well as some insights on how to maybe help you improve your writing. Henhouse, my reimagining of Pride and Prejudice in small town New Hampshire, releases this September. It follows Effie and Hope Thatcher as they try to prove to the rest of their lovelorn family that their grandmother Dorothea did not find the last good man, and in fact love is out there for them all to claim. So it follows their emotional pitfalls, the rifts between family members, the struggles of letting yourself have this love and happiness that you've always desired, and I think you'll really love it. Go ahead and hit subscribe and follow if you want to have input on what kind of videos I put out next. Make sure you turn on notifications so that you are alerted when my next video drops. The next one will be about different writing tips and tricks between screenplays and novel writing and how I found to navigate those two worlds. If you're interested in signing up to be an ARC reader for Henhouse, those applications are now open at emilyprescott.com. You can hit the banner at the top and it'll bring you to the form to fill out. Otherwise, pre-orders will be up soon. Thank you so much. With much love and gratitude. Have a great day.